Uh-oh, happy fingers. All right, there we go. So like I mentioned earlier, if you'd be so kind just to drop your name, title, and agency and email. Well, actually, we don't need emails. I think we have everyone's email, but name, title, and agency in the chat. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and keep on moving. We have two new people today, right? Myself and my lovely counterpart, Isaac. Isaac, do you want to wave to everyone? So we are your two new HMIS team members, and I'm sure you can all hear the excitement in my voice, but we are excited to be working with you all and supporting you all in your HMIS data journeys. So for today's agenda, again, we do have a jam-packed meeting for you all today. Of course, we have welcome and introductions. We have a fun true or false icebreaker for you all. After that, we'll jump into business objects. It'll be a nice refresher. We'll also talk today about entry exit reports versus services reports. After that, we'll be discussing updating income sources, then exit destination and reason for leaving. Then after that, we're going to touch on data quality reports updates and also data quality benchmarks. And we're actually going to have an entry and exit demonstration for you all today, which should be good. Then after that, we're going to talk about HUD standards updates. We're going to briefly talk about the new informed consent and release of information form. And then last but not least, we'll leave it open for questions and answers. Sound good? Awesome, I like the nods. So we'll go ahead and keep on going to our fun true or false icebreaker. So I know you guys have been stuck at your desk, right, all day working hard. So I thought we could take a nice moment away for some trivia. So for today's icebreaker, I want you all to try to guess the correct answer by using the raise your hand function in Zoom. If you look down at the bottom where your commands are, you'll notice that there is a reaction tab, and you'll be able to raise your hand from that reaction tab, okay? All right, so we'll get started with number one. We ready? All right. So, true or false? HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System. Ooh, whose hand did we see first? I think I might have seen, oh, this is hard. I saw either Karen or Ryan first. All right, Karen, we'll go ahead and give it to you and then pass it to Ryan if needed.
I said it's true.
All right, let's see what that answer is. I'm sure everyone knows this, right? The answer is true. Yes, HMIS stands for our Homeless Management Information System. It's, of course, where we go to collect, organize, track, right, our clients, those outcomes, services, right? So that way we're not duplicating those services, also making for a better client experience as far as the retelling of their stories as well. Okay, thank you, Karen. Great job. So the next one, true or false? Verbal consent for release of information does not expire. Ooh, okay, I have Olivia. Everybody's super quick today. Olivia, give us the answer. Uh-oh, are you muted?
That would be false.
All right. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, verbal consent for a release of information or ROI expires after 1 year. Can someone tell me which release of information form does not expire? Not everybody all at once. Olivia, you want to take it again? Oh, muted.
Amani, I see
That
Trip's hand up.
That
Oh.
would be true, but I will be honest in saying that I'm not the one raising my hand. I'm not sure what my Zoom is doing right now.
Very good. Thank you so much for the honesty. Trip, I see that your hand is up. Do you want to give it a try?
Oh, I think I had my hand up from the last one. A written release of information doesn't expire.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
That is the answer. Thank you. And
Hey, good
that
guess.
was from our new training that we did. So awesome job. Gold star for you. Yes, everyone, that written form or written consent for release of information does not have an expiration date. Okay. Great job. So the last one, true or false? HUD stands for Department of Homeless and Urban Development. Oh, I see John had it. Go ahead, John. We have more than one John. John German. There we go.
Yes, that would be false, and that stands for the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Awesome. And of course, he is correct, everyone. HUD does stand for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Awesome, awesome job. So I only had 3 questions for you all today just to get those juices flowing. I appreciate and love everyone's participation though. Thank you. So next, I'm going to happily pass the baton over to Brian, who is going to talk about business objects.
All right, if you want to go on to the next slide. So back in May, ART, the old reporting tool, was replaced by Business Objects 4.3. Business Objects is now really the preferred reporting tool for HMIS when it comes to any report you would have run out of ART in the past. So the big things that you will see just running reports is it is significantly quicker. It's a lot more efficient. There are fewer error messages. There still are some that come up occasionally. WellSky is working on some of that, but generally you'll get a lot better response. Reports that were taking 5 to 10 minutes to run are running in usually a minute, sometimes a little longer. It just depends on the size of the report and the data, but it is now live. ART is still available, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but Business Objects is really where you should be running reports unless you are experiencing issues with ART. Reports that had been contained outside of ART, the client served report, CAPR, APR, PATH report, anything that you found in that provider report section, those are still contained in that section. Those are not considered to be advanced reports in the same way that something like the completeness report is. These are usually the reports that are required by federal funders or required by, or I shouldn't say required by, but set up by WellSky to be easy to use, readily available, and generally available to all end users. So there are a few distinctions. We have a couple sources for reporting, but really the general rule of thumb is if you are looking for something you ran out of ART, I strongly recommend that you use Business Objects. It's important, I think, to get familiar with the tool and what it looks like, and running reports so you're comfortable. ART will be sunsetting in the near future, and like I said, you'll have a lot better response time and effectiveness with Business Objects. Otherwise, their Business Objects is simply an updated version of what ART was. It's not a new tool. It's just a new version, but it does look very different. So if you were running something in ART, definitely recommend switching to Business Objects. Otherwise, if you're running something outside of ART, like the client serve, the CAPR, the APR, those are going to remain in the same location. And that's not going to change because what HUD and the federal partners need, the CSV exports from those and things like that, those are something that you're not going to get from Business Objects in the same way. So we're not going to see changes in where those are located. And there are advantages because those are live data. So you can make changes the same day and fix your exports before you export it. So just to be very clear, we still have the distinction between like the canned reports and the advanced reporting tool. The only change was that the advanced reporting tool is now replaced by a new version. If you want to go to the next slide. So with Business Objects being brand new, and it's also very new for SAP, they released the first version of it last summer. So the tool we have is slightly updated from that, but it is otherwise a very new software. There are going to be some bugs. WellSky is currently working on an update to that, and they're working to bring additional features online. Some of the features that we are used to from ART weren't available because in the the testing that WellSky had done, they weren't able to implement any of it until they actually went to the live site. So some of the scheduling options for reports and things like that will be coming online in the near future, hopefully with the update that they are working on right now. And as they can test it in the live environment and really start working on some of those changes, there are other features that may be coming as well. So this is also, like I said, a brand new reporting tool for SAP. SAP is releasing updates for it on a regular basis, and we will be seeing some of those. So I definitely would say to expect new reporting resources from WellSky, as well as new options within the report. So it's not, even though it's live and it is the recommended product, it's not really a finished tool. It's going to continue to be revised and improved as time goes. The old version of ART that we had was, it was sunset by SAP a while back, and so we needed to upgrade from that. And so that's why WellSky has been working on that, but it wasn't that way at release. It took time to get it to the stage it was at, not the errors, but the functionality available to it. So expect to see some new features coming out over time. And as we get that information from WellSky and SAP, we'll definitely be sure to pass it on and make sure people are aware of what is available through it. But I would also stress that the box at the bottom is also very important. So like I said, ART is still available. There are some bugs that we'll talk about on the next slide with business objects, but if there are updates, changes, fixes released to reports, that's going to be done through business objects and not through ART. At this point, ART is going to receive no further support. Any reports that are in ART but not in business objects will disappear right now when ART goes away in July. So any support done, because they are two separate installations, they don't talk to each other. So anything that's changed in one does not communicate to the other one. So the only reason you want to use ART is if business objects gives you an error and is not running, you can fall back on ART as a backup. Otherwise, the important thing is really to focus on using business objects and just get comfortable with the reports in it. That way, if you encounter issues, as we can identify those for WellSky and they can work on fixing them, you can use ART. We don't want to get to the point where something isn't working and we don't have a fallback plan. So definitely, as much as you can when you're running those reports, definitely use business objects and not use ART. Next slide. Okay, so like I said, there are a few bugs. The bugs on the left are the ones that regular users are going to potentially encounter. The bugs on the right only occur if you are creating a new report from scratch or making like actual changes to the structure of a report. The ones on the left are ones that are generally occurring to anyone who has access. So the first one is the reason why we still are going to have ART for a little while. This is one that should be fixed in the update coming sometime in the next couple of weeks. But if you have to reset your password in Pinellas HMIS, what happens when you connect to ART or to business objects is that your credentials from HMIS connect to the software and automatically log you into the software. So it's connected to your HMIS access. If you have to reset your password, and this could be if you forget it and you do the password reset request, or if your password expires in 9 days, if you hit that 90-day point and you have to reset it, this will cause an issue right now where you won't be able to log into business objects until the next day. And you'll get a message that says that basically you're not able to authenticate your connection. The reason this happens is that, like our business objects has to work off of it, basically a rebuild of the database created every night. And when that's created, your credentials are copied over. And so if your access is suspended, whether that's an expired password or like if a user leaves and then comes back, or something like that happens, basically it has to wait until that rebuild right now for that access to be restored. So if you get that issue, that's probably what happened. Like if you have to reset your password, it is going to delay it. If that happens, like I said, you can still use ART. WellSky is working on getting that to sync over so the access updates automatically like it does with ART. So hopefully we get that fixed soon. Until that's fixed, we'll probably maintain ART access just because that is definitely the most significant bug right now is that login issue. There are a few others that are, they're problematic, but they're not necessarily the same level. So one is scheduling reports. When you try to schedule a report, it may generate some incorrect prompts and not let you schedule it correctly. It's a functional issue that they are working on. There are a couple features to scheduling that WellSky is also working on making live. It was something they couldn't build in the test sites. So they had to wait until all of the sites were upgraded. But scheduling is also less of an issue now because the big thing with ART was you'd schedule those reports that would take 10 minutes to run. Most reports are running in a few minutes now, so the need to schedule is not as great. The other things that WellSky is working on with scheduling is looking at the ability to have like flexible prompts where when you schedule a report to run on a repeat basis, it changes the prompts to match like the last month or something. So we may get some really cool features out of that, but right now there may be some difficulties. It's not consistent. I'm not sure yet if it's been identified as a report specific issue or if it's just generally it happens from time to time with no set pattern, but that is something that WellSky is working on. And then the last one is not necessarily an issue if you're just running a report. If you try to use the save feature within business objects, so not downloading the file, not saving an Excel or a PDF, but if you want to actually save a copy of the report, it has a tendency to take a little longer than expected. It's usually still saving in a few minutes, but it should be just a few seconds. So you may see your screen freeze up, it'll be processing, trying to show like the folder location where you want to save the file. So that is something they're also working on as well. Again, it usually does save, but just may freeze up your browser for a few minutes, and just cause a few hiccups there. If you're exporting the file, it's not going to cause those same issues. It saves it, however long it takes to process the file size. So this is only really if you're creating a new report, but I do know some users were trying to, save some of their certification reports and things that you're used to doing a certain way. And if you accidentally click on the save icon, the hard disk icon, it may freeze up on you. It'll eventually process, but just keep that in mind. The save is in a slightly different spot. If you're creating a new report, this is really unavoidable. So for those of you that build their own reports, just keep in mind it may take a little longer to save. That's just the first time. If you are saving prompts from a report that already exists, it saves basically immediately. It's really just you're creating a new copy or building a report from scratch that you would see this issue. For the custom reporting, I know this is a small subset of our users, but just a few issues that WellSky is also working on. Basically some issues with queries. Most of them are easily avoidable. You can't use certain functions in the queries. You can't pick values from a list in the query itself, but you can do that through the prompt. So it just changes how you have to write the report. It doesn't really make a huge difference. And then the duplicate query and changing the query source functions are not working right now. But again, you can duplicate the query manually. It takes a little more time, but it can still be done. And then changing the query source, unfortunately, that's probably the biggest barrier if you have to. The only option right now is to, rewrite the query. So just keep that in mind. We are hoping that these will all be resolved quickly. WellSky is working on that and putting a lot of focus on getting these fixed, especially like the password reset issue. All right, if you go to the next slide. So I've mentioned the upgrades and the fixes. So right now, WellSky is working on a service pack. They're hoping to have that released either at the end of June or early July. There's no set date yet. As bugs are identified, if they can get it worked into it, they'll get it worked in. But I would expect additional service packs in the future too, to add new functionality as well as resolving other bugs that come up. So just keep that in mind. Again, if you're just running a report, most of these won't affect you. But there are a few that could be problematic, mainly the password reset issue. If you have an issue, like let's say there's a report that's upgraded in business objects and not in ART, you reset your password, you need something, just send us a help desk ticket as soon as you realize that that's the problem, and we can help out with that until we get the fix from WellSky and SAP. The upgrade process, once they do the service pack, it should fix all of the critical bugs. They'll again work on some of the other features. When they do this, they're also going to be replacing the like connect to art buttons with connect to business objects. And that's really going to be the point when we really fully move over and art will be phased out. And after they replace the connect to art buttons with connect to business objects, and mainly the button in the top right corner by your name, then art's probably going to go away completely. We don't have a set date. I'm expecting mid-July. Again, it depends on the resolution of some of these critical bugs. But once that happens, art is gone. So if you realize that there's a report you need, and it's in your folder and it's in art and not in business objects, make sure you contact us as soon as possible. They should all be copied over. I've been going through making sure that the reports match and going through and making sure that the upgrade didn't break any of our local reports. WellSky is doing the same with the reports that they publish. So we are working through all of that. There's a lot to go through. But if you come across something that seems to be missing, definitely let us know sooner than later so we can work with WellSky to see if we can get it copied over or if we need to rebuild it or something. So definitely keep an eye out for that. If there is something that's been built for you that you use, I'm sure at this point you probably would have noticed, but just keep an eye out and make sure you're not missing anything. All right, next slide. So there's also going to be a training for business objects. This is going to cover really a lot of the features, not so much specific reports as much as here are the features available. This is how we can use it, go through some of the new things. Tentatively looking at July 18 at 10 a.m. It's a Monday. It really depends on the service pack. I'm hoping once that is released, especially if it adds some of the functionality for scheduling, that's something that can be covered. So going to kind of play it by ear a little bit, but that's the tentative date. I don't want to push it back too much because I want to make sure people get a chance to go through and see what it looks like, see what's available before, before art gets fully sunset or, around the same time. So that way there's not a break between when art disappears and when, you realize you need to run some reports. So in this, planning on looking at, the reports that are available from WellSky, the reports that are available locally, what it looks like to run reports. It's very similar to art, but some of the prompts are a little different. Looking at, how you export data, and in this case, exporting is saving the file, saving it as an Excel or a PDF. The ways that you can use filters in the reports, it's one of the coolest features of the upgrade. It was available in art. It's just art was so unstable that it was easier to download the file and then work from there. With the stability of business objects, it has a much longer timeout. You can time out of HMIS and still be active in business objects for, essentially the entire day. I've almost had that. It's 90-minute timeout, but if you log back in 60 minutes later, you should still be good. So there are things you can do without even exporting it, but you can also do some filtering on the reports and then export, the filtered data so you can only look at what you want to look at. And then also, again, the scheduling functions. It is available now in some limited forms. There are some features to scheduling in 4.3 that are really cool. The ability to send scheduled reports to emails and stuff like that. So, if you need to send an email to someone, you can do it through HMIS, but you can also send it to their email so they get a notification that they have that report. So we're going to look at some of that, look at what that looks like once some of that's live. So it should be a good training, go through some of the necessary things that are available and help people get acclimated to the tool. So again, we'll send out more information once we have a firm date. It will be coming probably by the end of the month though, because I don't want to wait too long. So if we have to do it before some of the upgrades are known and we know what's coming, we can always revisit this with the webinar in the future as well. Next slide. So the last part for this is a new tool. We know that art had a number of error messages. I got very familiar with the error messages to the point where I could pretty much tell what was going on because a lot of them were very common. The same error message would come up. It was easy to figure out because we'd had the tool for several years. Business Objects is very new. The error messages I've seen so far are different. They're usually just a connection issue. I have not actually seen too many except for the password reset issue. But if something happens, data doesn't display correctly, you do get an error message, you're not sure what it means, or if you have an idea what it means, but you're not sure how to fix it. If anything happens that's weird, please take a screenshot and send it to us. If it's something that we can fix in a report, then great. But if it's something that is not something, if it's something that we can't fix, I want to get this to WellSky as soon as possible. We probably won't be the only community experiencing it. I have seen one report, one of the system performance measures that does not work right now. It's not something that agencies need to run, so it's not a huge priority because WellSky will get around to fixing it when they get time to get to it. They won't be due for another 8 months, so it's not a priority for them, but it is on their radar. It is something that did break in the upgrades. That does happen occasionally. So if you see something that's odd, no matter how minor it looks like, where something appears to be wrong, just please let us know. So that way we can either resolve it internally or escalate it to WellSky or SAP. That way, we don't want errors to be floating out there. If we don't know about it, we can't fix it. And we want to make sure we get to it as quickly as possible. So it's not, you're trying to submit a report for, a quarterly report or a grant or something, and something's not working right. I've noticed minor issues in some reports. Most of them appear to be fine, but there have been a few that I've had to go in and rewrite some of it. So if you see something, especially for locally customized reports, definitely send a help desk ticket. And if you can, highlight the area that looks off, that will definitely help us. All right. So I've been kind of looking, I don't see any questions. I mean, if you have any questions please feel free to drop them in the chat as well. So we're going to move on to kind of an area of some confusion, I think, with kind of in relation to the certification process, but just in general with workflows, and that is entry, exit, and service reports. When do you use them, what they mean, and it really just focused on when you want to use them. So what is the difference between the two? So we have entry, exit, and services. These are also the two basic workflows for HMIS. And that workflow determines which type of report, and we're really looking at completeness, benchmark reports, timeliness reports. The one that you really should be focused on as an agency or a program manager, as a single project. And so to go through it kind of slowly, just to make sure it's clear. So with entry exit, we have essentially three components to an entry exit. We have the intake, that entry date, that entry assessment. We have our interim update, and this could be an annual assessment if you're a PSH provider or some program that has people staying in for more than a year. It could just be a 90-day update. It could just be an update because their situation changed. So you have that interim update, which also has its own kind of mini assessment and an update date associated with it. And then you have the exit assessment. You have an exit date, their destination, some information, like let's say you're a rapid rehousing provider. At that point at exit, if they were housed, you want to make sure that you have captured a housing move-in date. If they've had a change in income, maybe the day before they exited, they gained employment, they gained a benefit. You want to record that in the exit. And so with this workflow, your data is entered through the entry exits. You can enter it through the profile, but really it should be going through the entry exit at all times. So you put it through the entry if it's true at point of entry. If it's a change during, you really want to put it through an interim update. So if they gain income and they lose income, they gain some non-cash benefit, health insurance, something like that changes. You want to update that through an interim update. And then you have the exit assessment, which is what their status was when they were discharged from your program, along with where they were discharged in the exit destination. And these are discrete data points for every client. So if you are a shelter provider, rapid rehousing provider, PSH, like any of those enrollment projects, you're going to see these like discrete points. Most providers, it's an entry and an exit. Those are, the very kind of quick stays. PSH, some rapid rehousing, that's where we see more interim updates because there are case managers working with them where changes occurred during, and they want to track that for their outcomes. And the reason why this is really important is that for the most part, that entry assessment, that interim update, that exit assessment are static points in time where you can always go back and look at what was true at that date for that client. So if that's the workflow you're using, you would want to use reports that reflect when you're collecting your information. For services, on the other hand, it's different. I don't want to say it's messier, it's just not as contained. And this is because data is collected and entered and verified every time you touch them for a service. Now, obviously, that can be very time consuming, especially for agencies that provide a lot of quick services like soup kitchens, which is why generally with services, they have a much shorter assessment because they don't have the staff, the capacity to go through and check all of this. So it's usually a shorter, more truncated assessment than a rapid rehousing provider or shelter that has some case management or has like a full intake that they are doing. So the service workflow is usually a little different. And in this case, data is corrected and potentially entered if you're entering it after the fact using backdate mode. So that way, when you look at the client profile, the information on the profile is what was accurate that day when you provided that service. And so generally the process on this is that for every service, you're verifying that the data is accurate and complete. This is relatively simple if you are adding 10 services for a client in the same day, but most are going to count that as 10 separate points in time because there are 10 services to pull. So if you look at the services report for completeness, every service counts for that client. So if you serve them 10 times in a day, that counts. If you serve them 10 times over 10 days, every single service will count. And so if time is passing and they may be going somewhere else, when they come back in, when you provide that service, your completeness report, those reports are going to pull based on what was in there. So even if you haven't changed that information, someone else might have. So it's very important to verify that. But the reason that's important is because if you're capturing the information through entry exit and providing services, so I'll use, again, rapid rehousing is a great example because they generally record case management, financial assistance, moving costs, things like that. Rapid rehousing has an established workflow that uses entry exit. If that's what you're collecting, you and your staff are collecting and updating information at intake, any updates, and at exit, making sure it remains correct when you hit those points. But if you're adding services in between, you're not necessarily doing the same thing. Like if you talked to the client yesterday, did the update because they moved in, now you're providing a financial aid, service because they, needed, a bed or something. They needed a crib. They needed something for the household. You updated the information yesterday when you did your update, but you're not necessarily doing the same thing today. So your workflow reflects the entry-exit process, not the service process. And why that's important is that with the services, every service is going to count. But if you aren't updating the information then, and that's not your workflow, running a service report like completeness is basically saying, we're doing all of this. And I mean, that's, especially for some providers, like that's far beyond what you have staff to do. So if you're using entry exit, that is your workflow. If you're not using entry exit, you're generally using services, like that's your workflow. So they are discrete things. You may be using entry exit and still adding services, but you don't want to be also running the reports for services. You maybe timeliness to make sure that services are being added in a timely fashion, but you don't really want to be looking at like completeness or data quality for services because that's holding yourself to something that you're not actually collecting. Go on to the next slide. So generally, every project should use a single report. So that should be based on your primary workflow, whether it's entry, exit, or services. You can choose to run both if you really want to. I do not recommend it. I definitely don't recommend running, if you're using entry exits, running services also and trying to clean that report. Sometimes it's pretty easy to do because you have to look at the earliest service and fix it, and it'll fix it for the others unless the data changed. But if that's not when you're collecting it, keep it simple and don't worry about that part. Really focus on the entry exit workflow that you use, because that's what we review when we look at COC data. We look at that portion we use service data for some things, but like if we're going to review rapid rehousing, we may look at the services added, we may look at the information contained there, but we're not going to be looking at data quality connected to those services. So really, if your project uses entry exits, and this is going to include pretty much any housing or shelter provider, street outreach, homeless prevention, diversion, coordinated entry navigators, and service providers like case managers that do an enrollment and track clients from start to whenever you discharge them, anyone that's using that process should just use an entry exit report. And you can use client serve, that's looking at how many services you provided, the funding spent, stuff like that. When you're looking at data quality, completeness, stuff like that, just do yourself a favor, use the entry exit report. You don't need to do services. Like I said, you can look at it internally if you really want to, but it's not necessary. If you have a project that's just adding services and no enrollments, this would be your service workflow. And generally the places we see this are the drop-in centers, meal sites, soup kitchens, places that have like heavy volunteer staff where they get so many people coming through, they really are not staffed to collect the full assessment. So there is usually a pretty small subset of our projects that are actually just doing services, because what's important for that, for the COC, for the system, is to know where people are touching the system. It's a great resource if we're looking for someone to say like, oh, they're hitting this soup kitchen every other day, or they're going here for mail or clothing or something. It gives us that information, but it doesn't provide the same level of detail. So most of our projects use entry exit. And most people here use entry exit. It's really a few small providers, or I should say not small providers, but a small set of our providers that use the service only. And usually it's restricted to like meal sites and soup kitchens. Most local, state, and all federal funders require the entry exit workflow. That is the COC funded workflow, the SSVF, RI, PATH, ESG, all of those workflows fall under entry exit, and that is federally mandated. So if you are getting one of those funding sources, it's going to be entry exit. If you do one of these project types, or you just choose to use entry exit, like a drop-in center could do entry exit if they want to. It just becomes a big burden because you don't always know when that person disappears. And so the entries float out there and they just eventually have to close them kind of arbitrarily. So definitely keep it simple. If you have questions, reach out to the help desk. We can point you in the right direction. I'm going to say that, if you run an entry exit report, that's probably going to be correct. If you run an entry exit report, you get no data. It means you don't have entry exit, so you can use services. But if you see your provider in this italicized list, it's going to be entry exit. Now, agencies may be a little different. If you want to go to the next slide. So for when it comes time to run reports, really think about like how you're tracking that data, what kind of enrollment you're doing, if you're using one or just adding the services. If a project only adds services, definitely run a service report for that project. Otherwise, you can run the entry exit report. You don't want to run both for the same project unless you're choosing to for some reason. Really just use one, but as an agency, you may have to use multiple. Like if you have a soup kitchen and a drop-in center and rapid rehousing and prevention, like you have to run both, but you should be picking the specific projects for each report. So you're not just, you don't want to necessarily just pick all of the projects and use that. It would be fine with entry exit because if there are no entry exits there, it just will skip them. But if you're adding services to an enrollment project, case management for shelter or rapid rehousing, it will pick it up. So just keep that in mind. We want to keep this simple for people and make sure people are really focusing on what will help them when it comes time to submit reports to funders or grant applications. We want to make sure that you are looking at just the information you're actually collecting and really responsible for. Go on to the next slide. So with that, the certification process has changed a little bit. We are working on what this will look like long-term. The idea is that we'll have a single report, one for each workflow that agencies can run that will track the benchmarks. So we have one right now. This is the data quality benchmark report. We'll look at that in a little bit. This is what we had the training on back in April. this is new. We're getting it started. There were, with the upgrade, it did have a couple things that broke. I do really appreciate some of the people on this call that sent in tickets about some of the issues they found. I think all of those are now fixed, and there's a new version in the folder. We'll look at the folders because I'm changing those up a little bit too to make them easier. So if you use entry exits, this is your report. It includes, basically, it really looks at completeness right now, and it includes timeliness. So you don't have to run both, you just run that one. For services right now, it's still going to be the 243 completeness report. I am updating that report to include timeliness as well. So again, you'll just have the one report. When data and system performance set the benchmarks for the COC, they looked at the entry exit workflow. They did not set them for services. And part of that's because we have different service providers that do very different things. And I'm looking at the service only people, not people doing enrollments and services. They do different things. And so we don't know if all of it will fit. Soup kitchens usually use like scan points. They scan people through. It's very different than, drop-in center that has some staff working with the person. So data and system performance needs to look at setting some benchmarks for that. So right now it's still going to be completeness. And honestly, the entry exit report, despite being expanded, is still really looking at completeness. So for certifications, you do not need to use the 252 for entry exit. You'll use the benchmark report instead. The 640 data quality report, what we needed out of that, we're incorporating into the entry exit report. So again, that one's getting phased out as well. And then the 2 timeliness reports, the locally created reports from a long time ago, are also going to get phased out. So that way you can run a single report and get all of it. Now, the one thing I'll say is that there's still a folder in the shared folder with those reports, because we do have local funders that require them. So they will still be there. They will still be maintained. They're not going to go away because we have funders asking for that information. It's just for the certification, we will not be using them. Great, and I will turn this over to Imani.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So I will be talking about updating income sources today. In our last data quality meeting, we were noticing that the updating income workflow had a few errors. So I definitely wanted to quickly touch base with you all about how to properly update income sources in HMIS. And to get started, I just want to let you all know that there are 5 steps that I want you all to keep in mind. So those 5 steps are to view, to end, to update, to add or modify, and then last but not least, save and summarize, okay? So for that first step, it's going to be to view all income. So when we're updating our income sources, we do not want to click on the add button here, right? We do not want to click on the pencil or the garbage can. To do any updates or modifications to the income sources, we want to make sure that we're viewing all the income, right? By either clicking the magnifying glass here or going in and clicking next here, okay? That way you'll be able to see all the different income sources that have been input, whether it is a yes, that they are receiving that income, or a no, okay? Then once you realize or find that you want to add any updates or modifications, you'll actually want to click on the button here that says HUD verification, which will take you into the actual HUD verification box where you'll be able to add in your updates and modifications, okay? The biggest and most important piece that I want you all to remember is that when we are updating or modifying an income source, we want to make sure that we are putting in an end date to the previous end users know about the income source, okay? So for instance, if we see that a client had a previous earned income and we need to change that amount, right? We're going to instead of, clicking on the pencil, right, to add in that new amount, we'll just be adding in an end date, okay? And very, very important, you want to make sure that the end date is the day before the start date of your project. Or another way to remember that is it's going to be a day before whatever date is in that box above. Okay. There we go. So that third step is going to be update receiving income question, right? So after we realize that we need to do some updating, what will happen is we'll go ahead and click on the pencil from inside of the income source, put in our end date, and then it'll actually change to incomplete, which will give you the ability to go back in and add in your option, whether it's a yes, they are receiving that income source, or a no. Okay. Then the fourth step. So once we select yes or no, we'll have a brand new box to add in our new information. In the box, if the client is receiving that income source, you'll be able to add in the amount here. You'll also be able to select if the income has been verified. You'll be able to put the annual income if your agency requires that information. I know some do and some don't. And then the start date is going to be the date of that brand new project, right? Or the date that you're doing that entry assessment. Okay. All right. And then last but not least, of course, we want to make sure that we are saving and summarizing our edits. So right above, let me go back just a teensy bit. There we go. So right above this first initial box, you're going to have two boxes that's going to ask you what the amount of income is, right? So the total monthly income and the income from any source. So you do want to make sure that your answers in that HUD verification box are matching the two questions that are above. Okay. So I'll pause. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, awesome. So we'll move on to the next thing. So next, I'm going to talk about the exit destination and reason for leaving. So for the exit destination and reason for leaving, it's super important that we're updating this information when we're doing our exit assessment, because we really want to make sure that we're tracking those client outcomes, right? There we go. So when we're updating the destination and reason for leaving, you first want to select that reason for leaving. And as you can see, the dropdown has a bunch of options, whether it's that the client completed the program, if our transient client, right, has relocated or you haven't been able to reach them, you can select that one. Again, we have needs could not be met or no longer eligible. So you want to make sure that you are selecting the best fit for your client. Okay. So after you select the reason for leaving, it's very, very important to select the client's destination. So this box will actually look pretty similar to the previous location question that's in the entry or intake assessment. But here we really want to try to figure out where the client is going to land next. And those options, again, can include permanent options, temporary options, institutional settings, and others, right? Like those category ones. Great. Any questions at all about updating our destination or exit destination or reason for leaving? All right, great. So I'm going to pass the baton back on over to Brian to talk about data quality report updates.
All right. If you want to stop sharing your screen for a second so I can pull up the report.
I have a question. I wasn't quick enough.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please ask away.
So I was under the impression if we are working with a client and they have a change in income, we would go in under an update to do that. Is that changed?
Are you talking about like an interim update through the entry exit?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. So think of it as basically the point at which the information is true. So if you're doing it at intake, you'd update it there. If it's 6 months later, you would do the interim update and add it through that point and update it for the day before that update. And I'll say too, like, for clarifying too, it's also the date of discovery. So, you know, if someone comes to you and they say that they started getting the benefit last week, like this is the date you know about it. That time isn't really going to change much as far as like reporting and your outcomes go. So yeah, the interim update would be the way you'd want to do it for an entry exit. And then of course, if it's done at exit, you do it through the exit assessment.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. All right, let me pull up. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, I'm seeing nodding, great. Okay, so this is the reporting section. Obviously, this is something that should be relatively familiar. So I'll just touch on a few things real quick. So first, up here in the top right, let me zoom in a little bit to make it easier to see, where it says connect to ART. This is where it will be replaced by connect to business objects in the future. So you'll have that option. Right now, under the reporting dropdown, you do see the SAP business objects on the left, and then there's also the button down here. So you can use any of those to access it. There's still the ART button. You want to click on this one. This will open up business objects. The thing that I like so much about this is that it actually opens in a new window now, so you don't have to navigate through the folders within HMIS, and then if you need to go somewhere else, you lose your place and you have to go back and open it. So it's actually going to open in a new browser window. So this is some of what we'll talk about with the training for business objects in the future, but generally what you want to know is folders to get to the reports. You have the public folder here, and then in the public folder, you'll click on the HLB Live. And then again, we still have the shared folder at the top. You also see the drop downs on the left, so you can still use this to navigate. In the shared folder, one of the changes I've made so far is that starting to group the reports. So you have an archived report section for old reports that someone may still need, but as far as we are aware, nobody needs them. These are for locally customized reports. So that's what the archived folder is for. The folder for certification. So this is where you'd access the reports you need for the certification process. And then there is the folder for completeness and timeliness. So if you need to run those reports for a funder, you can still find them there. So in the certification folder, we have the data quality benchmark report. This is what we're going to look at today real quick. And then there's also the 243 completeness report. This arrow just means it's a shortcut. That way, if we update one version, this version also gets updated. So the completeness folder and this folder will have the same version of the report. To run it, you just click on the report name itself, and it will open up the report in a window. The nice thing is, again, this runs very quick. So we get the prompts, same basic prompts. If you see EDA provider, just leave it as default provider. You don't need to change it. In this one, you'll see the blue checks next to prompts that are completed. We have our start date and end date. And for providers, when you click on this, it's going to load. It's going to take a second. You want to click on, so you have two options. You can actually start searching from here and just start typing in a name. If it doesn't show up right away, you can also click on the refresh button up here and it will reload them. And then you can do whatever you want to look at them. You can click on one, you can highlight multiple. If you search for a provider, if you click on a bunch and you don't want, you can click on the reset button here. But if you search for like a provider, once it loads, if you just click on one of them and then hit Control A, it'll select all of them. So if you need to select 40 projects for the agencies that are that large and have a number, Control A will let you select all of them at once. You can also shift click. But basically, and I'm just going to select, we're going to look at the overall, we're not going to look at anyone's data. I don't want to go through that, but we're just going to select everybody so we just see a little bit of everything. You can see there are 328 projects. We're looking at a month of data. You'll see this list here that is obviously way too long and then click run. I will say in Art, I would have never run this report. It would take at least 15 minutes to run if Art let it run. This is something you would schedule. But, and we're looking at, I mean, probably close to 15,000 records in this report. And it's still going to run in a couple minutes. If anyone ever did any of the like Art report trainings with me for some of it, like I was always very hesitant to even run the reports in the trainings live because if it errored out, it was closing down your browser, it was refreshing, it was killing time until the report ran. With this, I don't have the same concerns. I'm really just waiting for this to run. The bar also tends to be pretty accurate. So when it says it'll take a minute, I mean, it's usually pretty close. Now, of course, I've said all of that. We'll see if it actually runs. But so far, I've been very happy with it. And it's generally running pretty quickly. Once this runs, you can already probably see it if you've used business objects, the layout is different than it was in Art. It's a lot cleaner. Generally, things are a little easier to find. It looks nicer. There we go. So you'll see this. Anytime you see these three bubbles, that means it's currently processing and loading the information. And so here we have all of our benchmarks. We can see what this looks like. We have the overall, we have our project benchmark. So we're looking at the overall for an agency and we're looking at the overall as a COC. We're not necessarily interested, like if you're an agency that has 5 rapid rehousing providers or you have 10 PSH, we don't necessarily care if PSH 1 versus PSH 2, like what the difference is there. It's really PSH. How is PSH doing? What are the issues there? How's rapid rehousing doing? What are the issues there? And so with that, we're looking at a larger scale than a specific project. Of course, some agencies only have 1 or 2 projects, so it's a little different. But for the most part, what we're looking at is we're looking at it as a system. So it's not, if you have multiple, this is the part we're really looking at. When we look at maybe a benchmark that's missed, definitely for you, look at the projects, look at the client detail that's into the DQ detail here. It'll show you which clients are missing the pieces of information that they're missing. That's definitely something to look at. But for us and for the certification, we're looking at this piece here. We don't necessarily care if it's like these 5 rapid rehousing providers met the benchmark, this one didn't. It's just as a whole. So if the balance is that that your rapid rehousing providers as a whole met the benchmark, then that's great. Of course, we want to get as close to 100% as possible for these, but we know that's not necessarily realistic. So to go through the report, just so we can all know what we're seeing, the section in blue at the top here is simply showing you how many people in that project type for your agency fall into that category. All enrollments is going to be everybody. Adult enrollments is going to be 18 and up. Head of household, of course, is those that are marked as self-head of household. Exits to permanent housing for head of households. This is looking at rapid rehousing providers, making sure there's a housing move-in date. Adult and head of household enrollments, so data elements that require anyone who is an adult or head of household to have that filled out. That will be a little different. Then of course, all exits is going to look at all of your exits during the reporting period. So these are basically counts. And what you want to know from these is just, these are basically your denominator for the calculations below. So when you look at something like the name data quality that says all, you want to come up to the one that says all up here, which will be your all enrollment. So you can see that this is essentially 492 out of 517, so 95%. That's what we're looking at with the blue sections, just giving those counts. So and it should help, if you know that you served 600 people and you see 517, you might be missing some enrollments. If you had 170 people exit instead of 166, you might be missing a few exits, or maybe they exited, the day after the reporting period. So you get some of that information here. This is really just to show get so what the calculations are when it comes to the benchmarks below. So those are purely just our counts. The timeliness section is going to match what the old timeliness report was. These are only the enrollments for that reporting period. So if it's a month, a quarter, or a year, it's only those enrollments where the entry date falls between the start and end date for your report, which is exactly what our other local timeliness report did. So, the reason for this is we want to let old enrollments fall off so we can see improvement over time. Timeliness, again, is not something you can fix. It's a system date based on the date that data was created and the date it was created for. But if you have a program where people are enrolled for 5 years and you had to backdate people at one point, or if you had to get the project started after you got clarification from your funder and you're a month behind, it's going to have that immediate impact when you put that data in. But we want to let that fall off so we can see, if that was just a 1 month anomaly, it's not really an issue. But if we're seeing timeliness issues month after month, it becomes a question about maybe we can do something to improve it so we get the data in a timely fashion. Because the big thing for timeliness is, other people need to be able to see that the client is enrolled. If they're trying to do quality checks, if we're trying to make sure if someone's still active for coordinated entry, we want to make sure that the data is in there in a timely fashion. So, someone doesn't get closed out by accident, or if we're looking for someone for a housing opportunity, we know where we can find them. So timeliness is important, but it's just not something we can fix. We can just improve it in the process over time. For the benchmarks themselves, and at the top, it gives you the project type, which will match the certification process. But I just want to focus on this because outside of the project type, the rest of it's the same. The only exception is like when you look at the rapid rehousing, housing move-in date versus permanent housing, it's collected at a different point. But basically what we're looking at is for each of these, there is the data quality plan. It's on the help desk. It has each project type and the benchmark set by the COC, by the Data and System Performance Committee. And basically it's just measuring to see if you meet the benchmark, if you are, falling short. The Data and System Performance Committee did not set up like, any kind of gradient. So it's basically you meet it or you don't. It used to be with completeness, you would get a letter grade. With this, it is basically, are you at that threshold or not? If it's highlighted in red, it means you're not quite there. It could be, it could be 0.1% off. It could be 10% off, 50% off. It can vary. So just keep an eye on that. If it's very close, it's a different issue. Maybe one client. Than if it's really far off. So keep that in mind. I will also say that this is something that Data and System Performance will be reviewing too, because they just set these benchmarks really a couple months ago. This is very new for how we're looking at this. So if a program, a project type COC wide is missing something on a regular basis, maybe there's something we can do to help. Or maybe it's something where the benchmark that was set is just too unrealistic and they need to reevaluate to see what a more realistic threshold would be. So for the certification, you want to look to see which ones are highlighted in red. Fix what you can. Even if they're not highlighted in red, obviously you can still work on improving it. If it's a couple clients off, it may be an easy fix. But the ones that are in red are the ones that are missed. So those would be the focus for the certification, for cleanup, and potentially some technical assistance. And then as we scroll through, so when we go through the demographics, all pretty basic. We do the relationship to head of household. For the demographics, it is the same as completeness, basically, as long as it is a valid response that is usable. If it's blank, data not collected, it's going to be a null value. Otherwise, it's generally going to be correct. With the relationship to head of household, this one's a little more complex. It's looking for one head of household per unit, whether that's a single person or if it's a family. You want to make sure there's only one and only one head of household. If there are two, it will be an error. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, it really follows the completeness process. So most of this is really looking to see, is the information filled out? We have housing move-in dates. We have the residence prior length of stay, the homeless questions in here. All of those are the kind of the benchmarks we've looked at in the past with completeness. Then we get to the pending section. And right now, we don't have any alerters on it because Data and system performance has sort of set benchmarks for them, but they are tentative. They are not set in stone. They have an idea of what we're looking at, but they just haven't set an actual benchmark yet. So they will be reviewing this to see like what rapid rehousing looks like when it comes to the landlord contact information or the client's last permanent address, looking at that by project type to see, is there something that, that needs to be fixed on the proposed benchmark? Is it information we need? That's the other thing too, that there will be conversations about whether or not that is a piece of information that is actually needed by the COC, or can we omit that one? So this one I would not say to be as concerned about. Just keep in mind that these will be revisited in the future, and they may very well jump up into this section. So the nice thing about this is that as data and system performance makes changes to the benchmarks, we will obviously communicate that to providers, but we can just roll it into this report to where this report will be a living document. It'll be updated and refined as time goes. You won't have to learn, a new report or adjust to that. We can just incorporate it into this one. And then, you just, what report to run each month. Services, we'll see what that and system performance chooses to do with that. But right now, we're going to use the completeness report. We don't have target benchmarks for it. So we'll have to see with the project types, outside of the HUD project types, data and system performance chose to break out like diversion and some of the housing navigators and stuff like that. Some of those categories that get grouped in with like a service only category, but doesn't necessarily match like a case management program. So they chose to make some things a little more fine-tuned. And I'd imagine with providers that are just using services, there'll probably be some distinction between, a drop-in center and a soup kitchen, because the capacity and the actual workflow is different. But with that also, we will see the same basic setup. We'll see a single report that can be maintained and updated as time goes. So again, when you run this for June, just go through, look for the ones that are in red. You can go through your projects to see if there's a specific project that's falling behind, look at the data quality. I am working on adding in the user creating information for this, like we had for the completeness report. With the upgrade and breaking a few things in the report, I had to go through and spend time on that. So we'll be working on adding that in, because I want to make sure that, if you're looking to have that user correct their data, you can definitely send that to the user in question. So that will be coming in one of the future upgrades as well to this report. But basically your process is looking at this and doing whatever cleanup you can. And like I said, pretty much looking for missing data, just like completeness. This will potentially be revised to start building in some additional data quality things when you look at certain areas to make sure, some of the areas match, like we're looking at income, making sure the total monthly income and the different sources all match up. So there may be some more complex things added in the future, but data and system performance didn't really set anything like that up right now. So think of it like completeness. And if you come across something you're not sure what it is, definitely let us know. We can help you work through that, resolve any issues, clarify any data quality problems. But once you have this report, up here at the top, there's this save icon. This is the one that saves it within business objects. That's not what you want to use. Under the file section, there are the three dots here, this icon. If you click on that, you get your options. So you have print, which will print it as a hard copy. I don't recommend using print. I've never had success with it printing well. It tends to not format quite right. But right below it is export. Click on export. And then what you get is your file types. Excel and PDF are the two that we generally use. If you want to sort and filter the client detail and send it out to people, definitely use Excel. Over here, you can actually pick which sections of the report you want. So if you just want to save the whole thing, you can click on all. Otherwise, if you just want to look at the detail and just say, here are the ones we're missing, let's get those fixed. You don't really care about the overall while you're fixing it. You just want the detail. You can click on that, but you can otherwise select any or all of them that you want. Once you have them selected, click export in the bottom right. And again, you'll see your 3 dots, which indicates that it is processing. And then again, depending on the size of the report, this one will probably take a little while because I did run it for everyone and there are a lot of enrollments. So it'll probably take a little while, but it's just going to download it usually to your download folder. Wherever your computer defaults to save the files is where this is going to go. There it goes. Did not take that long at all. And so now we have our Excel file and you can open that up and look at your data. Any questions on this? All right, I'm going to stop sharing so Imani can share the slides again. I think jump to the next slide. So we did that. All right, so I mentioned a report training for this. So we'll be doing a training that will walk through each of the data elements and including the ones that are pending, so you understand what data and system performance is looking at. Like I said, most of them are pretty straightforward, so we won't spend as much time on like the demographics as we will like relationship to head of household, housing move-in dates, the homeless questions, things like that. The ones that are because they're based on like some other factor like head of household or when they exit or when they enter, we'll spend a little more time on that. But it's going to cover running the report, reading the report in detail, and then how to fix those errors. And we did something similar with the 640. We'll do it with this one. With the service report, we're not going to forget that one. Right now, since it's completeness, we'll do our usual support and training on that. Once data and system performance looks at the service workflow and what they want to do with that, and we get something specific, of course, we'll do the same style of training for that. So I'm hoping by this time too that the updates to business objects will be in there, and I'll be able to have time to add in like the user creating and stuff like that, so we can go through all of that on the 28th. Like I said, right now that's tentative. It depends a little bit on the upgrades, but really I want to make sure that we get this done by the end of the month, so that way it'll be fresh in everyone's mind for the certification in August. That way we're still kind of piloting this. Like we're really going to start this up next month. We wanted to work through some of the glitches that came from the upgrade, and just it's a new report, new process. We want to make sure people are acclimated. We're not just going to dive into something. We want to make sure we can adjust as needed before we really like move forward with it. So we are working through that. So we'll do the training at the end of the month, so that way it's fresh in everyone's mind for when you do your certification for August or for the month of July. Go on to the next slide. All right, HUD standards, yay. So I cannot believe we're getting close to October. So it's getting time for HUD standards for fiscal year 2023. The great news is that from the last I heard, which was from the beginning of the month, there are no planned updates to the standards. So HUD has moved to a 2-year cycle. Basically, every other year they're doing a major set of updates. Fortunately, 2023, the odd years fall on really the no update years. Sometimes there'll be small updates. There's still a slim chance HUD or one of the federal partners could change their minds, but they're really past their deadline to get the changes to the vendors. So hopefully they do not make any changes now. There may be some other changes too. They may tweak some wording. I don't think they will. They will be updating some of the reports, some of the coding specifications for vendors. The one change I do know is coming really is for COC funded permanent supportive housing. In October of last year, there's the moving on and wellness fields that were added to the HUD standards for COC funded permanent supportive housing. And they are looking at adding these into the APR for those project types. So it won't apply to non-PSH, and it is only a requirement right now for a COC funded PSH, but they are looking at adding that right now. That's really the only major update that I know of coming from HUD, the only one that's been really referred to our vendor. So it seems like it's going to be a relatively small year for updates, which is really good. I mean, the updates to the standards usually necessitate a lot of reports changing, a lot of updates. And that's one of the things that tends to slow down vendors, including WellSky, when it comes to rolling out updates for their software. So HUD not releasing many or any updates this year is really nice, because it will give WellSky a chance to really push forward with some of those software updates and actually have time to focus on, providing for their clients and not just responding to HUD changes. So that's really good news. If you jump to the next slide. So as I mentioned, with this, 2024 will be a major HUD update year. This will be the second year in the cycle. What we've generally seen from HUD so far over the last year and a half or so is that HUD's really starting to look at what they're collecting and what they need. And this is beneficial to us too, because it means that we're looking at better demographic definitions, more inclusive language, looking at trying to collect some of the nuance that the old standards, which were very static and didn't have a lot of flexibility, were missing. So now you have the ability to select multiple gender identities. You'll be able to select more than just the primary, secondary race identities too. There's some of those changes coming that allow for more specific information that pertains to specific clients. And I know there have been talk about even revamping the demographic information for like race and ethnicity to make it more inclusive and allow for better detail in that. So we'll have to see what comes out of it. HUD is also starting to really look at subjective questions a little more. I mentioned the wellness fields for PSH, and those are really about how the client perceives their well-being. And so that's the first time HUD has actually released a truly subjective set of questions. And it's something they're starting to look at more. There are COCs that have done it. You do it for a point in time. And it's not always great data, but it provides information that the HUD standards just have avoided. So I expect to see more of that coming in the future. Don't know what it'll look like. HUD is working on community feedback on the standards through the end of the year. So we've talked about this a little bit, data and system performance, about what suggestions could we make to HUD? Can we put something forward? If you encounter something, your agency's encountered an issue with a data element, or there should be a better option for X, Y, and Z, definitely send it to us. We want to advocate to HUD if there are things that we can suggest. And like I said, HUD is working on that feedback through the end of the year, and then they'll work on finalizing the benchmark or the data standards for next October 2023, kind of early in 2023. So we still have about 6 months, but that isn't as long as it probably feels, because it felt like it hasn't been 6 months already. So keep that in mind. Definitely send us any ideas that you have. We can definitely work on it. We need to have, with those two, if you do think of something, the more concrete you can be in your suggestion, the better. If we just say this isn't working, HUD doesn't have much to go on, but if you have an idea, we can definitely help figure out how to word that, flesh it out, get some feedback from other providers, see is this something that everyone's dealing with? So that the more concrete and specific the example and suggestion, the more likely HUD will be to listen to it. But if anyone thinks of that, definitely send it to us. You can send it to the help desk or one of our surveys. So just keep that in mind as you're working on data and you're dealing with some of those HUD standard issues. Go on the next slide. All right, and I'll pass it back over to Amani.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So I just wanted to quickly remind you all that we do have a new new client informed consent and release of information form. So these forms were actually separate at one point, but about 3 months ago, it was approved through our policies and procedures, and thanks to our COC board, that we were able to combine the form into one, right, making life easier. But we are noticing that end users are still using the older form. So definitely wanted to remind you all, to remind your end users, right, that there is a brand new form. It covers, again, that informed consent and that release of information. Okay. Does anyone have any questions at all about the new form?
I do. How are you supposed to document all the household members on here?
Great question. Brian, can I pass that to you for the assist?
So, yeah, with the household members, they are included in this release. Generally, the release should be collected for anyone who's 18 and older, but otherwise, it by default collects the information for the children as well. In the section at the bottom on the left in the first page, it says, I agree to share my information, my children's information with, and it gives the options, whether it's all limited or with no other agencies. So it's done by default. Part of the reason for that is that in situations where a household member was added after the fact, like if there's a child that was born or something, we would see information in HMIS. There wasn't necessarily a release captured for it. I'm not saying there wasn't a paper form, but we weren't necessarily seeing that reflected. So we wanted to try and simplify that process a little bit. I would say that the big thing with this is definitely stress that to the clients when you're going through this. I will say we've had not a massive increase, but we've definitely had an increase of clients who don't want to share some of that information. And I think simplifying the forms from 2 forms, they have to kind of figure out both to one has improved that. So I think client choice is being respected a little more. If they don't want to share their children's information, also just make sure they do know that they are not required to share that information if they so choose. But if they want to protect the information for the children, I would definitely recommend having them change the visibility settings for their family. So it's generally treating it as a family unit instead of as individuals, hopefully simplifying the process and making sure that the big thing we were seeing is that we had a policy in place, but we wanted to make sure that agencies were covered in how it was implemented. And so we wanted to make sure it was simplified to that point. So that way, for a monitoring or an audit or something, you weren't missing something on accident. So we tried to simplify that a little bit. So, they still have the right to refuse to answer information and share information, especially for kids if they don't want to. And then otherwise, they can definitely restrict that information as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So just a few tidbits here at the end. So of course, we would love you all to participate and take our HMIS monthly satisfaction survey. We usually put the link in our newsletters, and if you scroll down on the newsletter, you'll be able to find that link to the survey at the end. Again, it helps us, your feedback actually helps us improve. Being data people, we love to maximize and make things more efficient, especially for our end users. So any feedback that you all have is greatly appreciated. And of course, upcoming agency admin meetings, we do hold these meetings quarterly. And for any calendar updates or the next day, I definitely will defer you to our community calendar, where you can not only find the next date for the agency admin meeting, you'll also be able to find dates for trainings as well. Great. Any lingering questions?
So Imani, I'm wondering if you could show everyone where that calendar is located on the website, or maybe Brian, you could. That way, I don't know if we ever made it clear to everybody where they could find it.
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and stop sharing screen. One moment.
Okay, so on our homepage, we have under the, excuse me, the news and events, the community calendar. And on this calendar, this is where you would normally find some of the other meetings, providers meetings, things like providers council, review and rank, data and system performance. But in this also, we are including, the HMIS, the scheduled trainings, as well as the agency administrator trainings. We're working on trying to plan this out moving forward. That way, we try to be flexible with the scheduling, but we also want to make sure people have advance notice. So in this, you will see whatever the most current month is. You can navigate at the top. And so if we jump forward to September, you'll see that we have the fourth quarter agency admin meeting scheduled here. We don't obviously have like the agenda and stuff posted on it yet, but we are going to be starting to schedule that stuff out, scheduling it for the year in advance. That way you can get it on your calendar early. If you open up the information, you'll see, the Zoom sign up, you'll see the calendar, the ICS for Outlook and the Google Calendar option. So you can click on that, go through the process of adding it to your calendar in advance. And again, we'll be planning this stuff out in the future. That way, you can know when those meetings are coming up. We don't have a surprise that comes up. We'll still be sending out information as the meetings get closer, but we want to just work on making sure it's available in advance. If something comes up, obviously we have to change it. Of course, we'll give plenty of advance notice, but we're hoping that we can keep these schedules pretty static. That way, everyone can plan in advance. And generally, we're looking at, I think it's like the third or fourth Wednesday of the month. That way, again, it's kind of a consistent day, consistent time, and it makes it easier for everyone to plan and make sure you can attend.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Any last minute questions at all?
The training or the tentative training that's going to be on the 28th of July, is that open to all HMIS end users or just agency admins?
So yeah, I mean, the trainings, this is pretty much the case for all of our trainings too. Like that training, since it's focused on the reports, anyone who's going to be running the reports can definitely attend. I think as long as we're under like 100 people, I think we have room, so it's really just the Zoom cap, but I don't think we'd ever have that issue. So it's primarily for those running reports, but agencies, also will send out the data to anyone else. So any of your end users that do cleanup or work on the data that are available can definitely attend. They may not get as much from the, information on how to run the reports, but definitely for cleaning the information, that would definitely help. So yeah, feel free to, when we get that scheduled and sent out, and the information will be in the, made available to everyone. You can feel free to send that to end users and staff, and it's open to anyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Check in the chat too. Well, all right. Well, everyone, we really appreciate you all spending some time with us this Wednesday afternoon. If you do have any other questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us here at HMIS. Anything you need as far as HMIS and users, please send us a help desk ticket and we're super duper happy to help.
Actually, I did just send Brian a message.
Awesome. We'll definitely take a look. Anybody else have any questions? All right, great. Well, this concludes today's meeting. Again, we appreciate you all, and we hope that you all have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you again.
Thanks, Amani. Thanks, team.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Of course. Thanks, everyone.